In the summer of 1841, the body of a young woman was pulled from the Hudson River. Her face was unrecognizable, her death brutal. But when the identity of the victim was revealed, all of New York was stunned. It was Mary Rogers, the once celebrated Pretty Cigar Girl, whose beauty had captivated a city. What happened to Mary remains one of the earliest true crime sensations in American history, and one of its most enduring mysteries. Hello, friends. My name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders. To understand the tragic tale of Mary Rogers, we must first step into the bustling, chaotic world of New York City in the early 1840s. The city was growing rapidly, a hotbed of immigration, industry, and ambition. The streets echoed with the clatter of horses and the cries of newsboys. Brothels, taverns, and gambling dens were as common as churches. Crime was on the rise, and the police force was rudimentary at best. In this gritty, male-dominated world, women were often seen, but rarely heard. It is believed beautiful and vivacious Mary, the daughter of Daniel and Phoebe Rogers, was born in Connecticut in 1820. After the death of her father in a steamboat accident in New Orleans in 1834, Phoebe moved the family from Connecticut to New York City, possibly because she had relatives there, and she opened a boarding house. Until the age of 20, Mary helped in the boarding house, although her amazing beauty made her the talk of the neighborhood. In 1840, John Anderson, a prosperous tobacco merchant, offered Mary a job in his New York tobacco store where she could help attract customers. Within months, she had become famous as the Pretty Cigar Girl, with customers coming to the store specifically to see her behind the counter. Although Mary was careful not to encourage any of the customers, many of the prominent young men in that part of New York City often spent hours in the store just to exchange teasing glances with her. By all accounts, she did well at her job and enjoyed working with the customers, until her first disappearance. On October 5, 1838, Mary vanished. Her mother reported her missing and claimed to find a suicide note. The coroner declared it a planned suicide, but a week later Mary returned, saying she had simply gone to visit friends in the country. While newspapers were initially sympathetic, they became increasingly skeptical about Mary's disappearance and even suggested it had been a publicity stunt set up by her employer. A few days after Mary returned, a widely circulated rumor had it that she was seen in New York with a tall, handsome naval officer during the time she was supposed to be in the country. Whatever the truth was, Mary suddenly resigned her position and again began helping her mother at the boarding house. Once the Pretty Cigar Girl was gone from the store, she faded from public attention. A month later, it was announced that she was engaged to be married to Daniel Payne, a quiet young clerk who resided at the boarding house. The actual circumstances of Mary's death are mostly speculation based on limited information. She was last seen alive on Sunday, July 25, 1841. After knocking on her fiancé's door at the boarding house, she told him she would be spending the day with Mrs. Downing, who lived on Bleecker Street. Reports differ on who Mrs. Downing was, with some reports saying she was Mary's aunt and others saying she was a friend. Nonetheless, she headed out, presumably to Bleecker Street, at about 10:30 a.m. This would be the last time she was seen alive. Although Payne had told her he would pick her up later that afternoon, a fierce thunderstorm made him change his plans. In a decision that would later haunt him, Daniel Payne decided to wait until morning, assuming that Mary would prefer to stay where she was overnight. He left for work the next morning as usual without checking on Mary's whereabouts. It was only when Mary's mother realized Mary never came home that she became alarmed. After Payne came home and found out that Mary was missing, he went to the Bleecker Street house and was told that Mary had never been there. The police were called and a general search was launched. Mary's disappearance became widespread news. 3 days later, on July 28, 1841, fishermen casting nets off Castle Point in Hoboken, New Jersey, spotted a body floating in the water. As police recovered the body, even veteran police officers were horrified by its condition. Although the corpse was recognizable as a young woman, the face had been completely destroyed by repeated blows with a blunt instrument. A stout cord was wrapped around the waist and attached to a heavy stone. There were signs of strangulation, and a piece of lace from a woman's dress was tied around the neck, as well as deep marks on both wrists where her hands had been tied. Her clothing was torn and disordered, but she still had gloves on both hands and a sunbonnet still secured to her neck. Although the forensic science was relatively crude, police had no difficulty identifying the victim as the missing Mary Rogers. After Mary's body was found, the authorities offered a large reward to anyone who had information about the person who killed her. They also promised that anyone who knew anything about the crime, except for the actual killer, would be given full protection and would not be punished. 2 days later, the coroner received an anonymous note stating that Mary had been seen in a boat with 6 rough-looking men. They were then met by 3 handsomely dressed gentlemen, and all disappeared into the woods together. Later investigation turned up a roadhouse where Mary was seen with a tall, well-dressed man of dark complexion. The innkeeper, Mrs. Loss, reported that the 2 of them went into the woods together, and she later heard a woman scream, although she didn't investigate. The spot where Mary had likely died was found near the roadhouse 2 months after her death. Various articles of clothing identified as belonging to Mary were found at the scene. Although police tried to find the dark-complexioned man who had been seen with Mary, no trace of him was ever found. Police also questioned Daniel Payne, John Anderson, and virtually every other man she had ever been associated with. Despite the media frenzy surrounding the murder and rewards offered for information, no clues were found, and media attention turned to new crimes. In the weeks following Mary's death, Payne had endured being the initial suspect, although he was later cleared, and had to undergo the trauma of identifying her remains at a second inquest, possibly sparked by the Tatler newspaper's repeated assertions that the body taken from the Hudson River was not Mary Rogers. It was also reported that Payne had been visited by Mary's ghost. On the morning of October 7, 1841, Payne left his New York City quarters. He had moved from the boarding house run by Mary's mother soon after Mary's death, and he proceeded to drink excessively at various bars in the neighborhood, stopping briefly in a store to purchase a small bottle of the poison laudanum. He caught an afternoon ferry for Hoboken, and his first stop in New Jersey was Loss's Tavern. There he drank brandy and got directions to the thicket where Mary's clothing had been found. Sitting next to the thicket, he took out a piece of paper and wrote, "To the world, here I am on the very spot. May God forgive me for my misspent life." Putting the note into his pocket, he then quickly consumed the poison and staggered off. The laudanum took some time to work painfully through his system, leaving the dying man enough time to stop at other taverns for more liquor. He finally stumbled back to the place where Mary's body had been brought ashore. He lay down on a bench there and died. One final twist to the story involved the innkeeper, Mrs. Loss, who, in 1842, made a deathbed confession that Mary had actually come to the inn to end a pregnancy, and that the well-dressed man was performing the operation. When the botched procedure caused Mary to bleed to death, Mrs. Loss had one of her sons toss Mary's body into the river. Given that Mrs. Loss had been questioned by the police several times before and gave contradictory statements, authorities doubted her deathbed confession. Still, many newspapers carried the story, despite the fact that it didn't match the details of the coroner's report. Nearly 2 centuries later, the murder of Mary Rogers remains unsolved. Was she the victim of a violent gang, a failed operation, or something darker, still hidden in the shadows of New York's past? Her death helped shape America's obsession with true crime and inspired writers like Edgar Allan Poe, who fictionalized her case in The Mystery of Marie Roget, the first detective story based on real events. But behind the headlines there was a real young woman, bright, ambitious, and admired by many, whose life ended in terror and mystery. Mary Rogers was not just a pretty face in a cigar shop. She was a daughter, a fiancée, and a name that still whispers through the history of New York's dark side. If you have any thoughts or theories about this case, please leave them in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.